Welcome to DrowsyTeller. Tonight, we won't be chasing lights in the sky. There are no disappearances in the forest, no secret labs beneath the desert. No monsters, at least, not the kind with claws. What we have instead is silence. Stillness. Something subtler than fear, but colder. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air hesitate? Not cold, not haunted, just slightly out of sync. Like reality took half a second too long to load? Have you ever caught your reflection blink before you did? We live in a world of clocks and headlines, patterns and noise. But some patterns don't announce themselves. They whisper. They repeat. Not to alarm you, but to prepare you. And if you've started noticing the time 11:11 more often than you should, if December 21st, 2012 feels like a date you should remember, but somehow can't, if déjà vu no longer feels mystical but mechanical, then maybe this story is already part of you. What follows is a record, a log, a quiet, desperate attempt to make sense of what should be impossible. It begins with clocks and ends with something much larger unraveling behind them. Call it a theory, a narrative, a symptom. But before you dismiss it, ask yourself, why do you remember what never happened? And why are you just now noticing? Take a breath. Let the static settle and listen. I didn't believe in patterns, not the kind that suggest fate, prophecy, or cosmic design. As a systems analyst, I made a living pulling noise from signal, logic from chaos. But everything changed on March 14th, 2024, at precisely 11:11 a.m., when all 5 clocks in my apartment, analog, digital, microwave, smartwatch, and router-based, froze. Simultaneously. All displaying that same mirrored, almost mocking timestamp. It could have been a coincidence. It should have been a coincidence. I would have dismissed it, except that it happened again, and again. Over the next 2 weeks, every major electronic in my apartment synchronized itself to that exact time. Devices without Wi-Fi, without internal clocks, began flashing 11:11 in eerie unison. The odds of this? Astronomically small, beyond mathematical randomness. It was as if something, or someone, was trying to tell me I was out of sync. I started documenting everything. Photos, video, time-lapse captures. I posted a thread on an obscure anomaly forum, just to see if anyone else had seen anything similar. Within hours, my inbox flooded. Not with trolls or vague replies, but with detailed logs, screenshots, EM field readings, even thermal fluctuations from hobbyist weather stations. The same timestamp, the same date, the same sense of wrongness. And then came the first email without a sender address. No metadata, no traceable headers, just the subject line. You're noticing because the system is failing. The message body was a string of hexadecimal code followed by a question. Do you remember December 21st, 2012? Of course, I remembered it, or thought I did. That was the day everyone joked about the Mayan apocalypse. It was the punchline of 1,000 memes. The date the world was supposed to end. But here's the thing. When I really thought back to that day, I couldn't remember anything specific. Not what I ate, not what I wore, not even whether it had been cloudy or clear. Just a static haze, as if someone had wiped the hard drive of my memory clean and left only the metadata. Curious, I called a few friends. Casual conversation at first. Hey, weird question, I'd ask, laughing. Do you remember what you were doing on December 21st, 2012? Most paused. Some joked, but more than one admitted, that's strange. I don't, actually. One even said, you know what's weird? I remember planning to have an end-of-the-world party, but I don't remember if we ever had it, like it got skipped. Skipped. That word landed like a loaded gun. It started with numbers, always the same sequence: 3, 3, 3, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then the static, dream static, like an untuned television humming behind my eyelids, and then a voice, flat, synthetic, and layered with distortion. Simulation cycle resuming. Integrity threshold reached. Predictive compression in progress. I would wake up cold despite the heater. I would find my phone's battery inexplicably drained, even when unplugged overnight. I started seeing movement in peripheral vision, people I could have sworn I'd seen before. Repeats. Like reality itself was buffering. It felt like déjà vu, only sharper, less mystical, more engineered. I reached out to a colleague from my university days, Dr. Elias Rowe, a theoretical physicist once blacklisted for proposing a paper on nonlinear data collapse in consensus-based space-time perception. He had vanished from public life in 2014 after a breakdown. I still had his private email. My message was short. "Do you think 2012 actually ended everything?" He replied within minutes. "Yes, meet me, bring no electronics." Whispers in the archives. Before meeting Elias, I visited the National Archive database. The public one, nothing secret. I searched weather patterns, news events, solar activity logs for December 2012, and I found gaps. Missing days in the NOAA climate record, corrupted satellite imagery, empty metadata fields for major observatories, hundreds of links redirected to 404s or blank PDFs. Entire datasets had either been scrubbed or never existed. It didn't make sense. Unless someone, or something, had overwritten that section of history. A hard reset. A system restore point, one that wasn't supposed to leave behind glitches. But it had, and I was beginning to see them. The silence between seconds. At 11:11 the next morning, I sat silently in my apartment. Every device unplugged. Still, I heard it. A high-frequency tone, like tinnitus but external, constant, mechanical. Then the analog clock on my desk ticked backwards. Just 1 second, then resumed. It wasn't broken, it was correcting, as if reality itself had stuttered, and was trying to reconcile the frame drop. That's when I realized I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't paranoid. I was awake in a system that was beginning to break down, and I needed answers before it rebooted again. And I forgot everything all over again. It was supposed to be a joke, a cultural sideshow. December 21st, 2012, the day the Mayan calendar ended, and supposedly so would everything else. The media treated it like a party. Pop culture cashed in. There were documentaries, late-night comedy routines, even government statements reassuring the public that the world would not, in fact, explode. NASA published an official FAQ dismissing any doomsday theories. Astronomers gave interviews with comforting smiles. It was business as usual. But beneath the noise, something real was stirring. The warning signs were subtle, buried in data most people never saw. In the final weeks of 2012, ground-based observatories across South America and Antarctica began experiencing equipment malfunctions. High-altitude balloons launched by independent research stations reported anomalous radiation spikes at stratospheric levels. Radio telescopes in Chile recorded irregular pulsations from the galactic center, short bursts of energy that appeared to repeat with unnatural precision. One spike occurred exactly at 11:11 a.m., GMT on December 21st. That timestamp again. That impossible, recurring number. Then came the silence. Several data streams went dark entirely. The Very Large Array in New Mexico experienced a multi-hour outage that was blamed on power routing errors. Weather satellites recorded strange thermal patterns in the upper atmosphere, resembling electromagnetic shearing. A handful of astrophysicists attempted to raise alarms, but their research vanished, literally. Papers were retracted or erased. Websites archived one day were blank the next. Names were scrubbed from university faculty lists. One physicist, Dr. Helen Norwood, posted a video warning that we are witnessing a structured reset event. She disappeared 48 hours later. No body, no investigation. Just a lease terminated, a phone disconnected, and a family instructed not to speak. At the time, I had written these events off as internet legends. Foggy, unsourced, unverifiable. But now, with the clock glitching and my memory stuttering, I went digging again. I found scraps in corners of the digital world that felt older than they should. Web pages that looked like artifacts, broken forums with just enough metadata to trace. I pulled archived research from a weather station in Svalbard that captured geomagnetic activity on December 21st. It wasn't normal. The readings showed not a spike, but a collapse, a drop to zero, as if Earth's magnetic field momentarily stopped functioning, or, more accurately, stopped being measured. The instruments didn't fail. They simply stopped seeing. I contacted a former NOAA technician who had worked at the McMurdo Station in Antarctica during that winter. He responded with a single encrypted audio file. His voice trembled as he described the moment when, at 11:11 a.m., all their instruments froze. No power surge, no mechanical failure, just everything holding its breath. Then, a sharp ping, like a sonar pulse, but internal. It was like something scanned us, he said. Not from the sky, from the ground, or, maybe, beneath it. And then came the reports of the dreamless night. Thousands of posts from around the world mentioned the same eerie sensation on the evening of December 21st. They slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woke feeling disoriented. Some thought they had died. Others described the sensation of being uploaded, like a flicker of themselves was pulled out of their heads and sent elsewhere. There was even a spike in hospital reports of acute derealization episodes in the days following. No official correlation was ever made, but the numbers were there, quietly cataloged in obscure medical journals and promptly forgotten. So, why don't we remember? Why is December 21st, 2012, so fuzzy in the minds of millions? Why is that date almost impossible to recall in specific detail, no matter how many times you try? The answer might lie not in what happened, but in what didn't. Because that day, our final day in the original timeline, wasn't meant to be remembered. It was a soft shutdown, a graceful exit. Not an explosion, but a transition, the kind that leaves no evidence, only the uncomfortable intuition that something changed, even if we can't say what. In the years since, our world has carried on, but something about it has felt thinner. You know it. I know it. That strange, hollow quality, the endless reboots of culture, the sudden inflation of nostalgia, the way history bends itself backwards to repeat things in distorted form, the simulations of emotion in digital environments, the collapse of nuance, the feeling that everything is scripted, yet shallow, a theater of events with no backstage. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the world didn't end in 2012. It simply stopped running the original code. The backup booted up instead, glitchy, patched, kept alive by a system no one remembers installing, But the more I dig, the clearer it becomes. The original version of reality was overwritten, and someone, or something, made sure we wouldn't notice, until now. His name was Vincent Ames. At least, that's what the badge on his coat said the day he walked into the small community archive in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, asking to see microfilm records from the 1990s. I happened to be there, quietly reviewing topographic maps for my research. I remember watching him speak to the archivist with a calm, measured voice, one that didn't quite match his eyes. Those eyes carried panic carefully buried under politeness. When the archivist told him the records were no longer in the catalog, he just stood there, motionless, as if his entire reality had just crumbled at his feet. Later, outside in the cold January air, he sat across from me on a bench and asked if I had ever heard of Centralia, Pennsylvania being evacuated in 1994. I told him yes, sort of. It was the coal fire, right? Underground mines catching fire in the 60s, and people gradually moved out in the decades after that. A ghost town. No, he said sharply. That's what they say now. But I was there. I lived there in 94. The fire wasn't the reason they cleared us out. There was something else. Something they found. But now I can't find any record of it. The town still exists, but it's wrong. Everything is misplaced. I should have walked away. I should have dismissed him as another eccentric suffering from a half-invented memory. But something about the way he said misplaced stuck with me. Not gone, not changed, just out of alignment, like furniture shuffled in the night. He told me he had started noticing inconsistencies in old newspaper clippings, in family photo albums, in his own handwriting. A town that once had 3 elementary schools now only had 2. A park, he swore, had a memorial in the center now stood empty. And his daughter's birth certificate, now listing a hospital that hadn't existed at the time. "Do you think I'm insane?" he asked. Number I didn't, because I had been seeing it too, and so had others. I went back to my archive access and started searching for documented cases of memory discrepancies. I wasn't looking for the light stuff, misquoted movie lines or brand names spelled differently. I wanted the deeper fractures, the ones that can't be passed off as confusion or faulty memory. I found a forum thread dated July 2016 where users shared eerily specific stories. Siblings who no longer remembered shared vacations, historical photos that now lacked prominent landmarks, entire streets in cities like Portland, Austin, and Milwaukee that simply no longer existed on Google Earth, though residents swore they had driven them daily for years. Then I stumbled across the name, the Mandela Effect. I had heard of it, of course. The collective false memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. But it went further than that. Too far. People recalling movie scenes that no longer existed. Historical events shifted by years. Maps that looked subtly wrong. Anatomical diagrams of the human body showing organ positions that seemed off to those who had studied them in school. What struck me wasn't just the volume of reports. It was the emotional intensity behind them. These weren't people guessing. They were grieving something, mourning the loss of a reality no one else remembered. And in all the threads, one date kept surfacing. December 21st, 2012. Some users began to refer to themselves as pre-2012s, those who claimed to have clear, vivid memories of the world before that year and who felt viscerally that something fundamental changed after. They talked about the shift not as a single moment, but as a rolling fog, creeping in quietly, rearranging the edges of memory first, and then working inward until you no longer trusted what you once knew. A man in São Paulo wrote that he remembered Brazil being called the Federal Republic in his school books. A woman from Quebec swore she had visited the Bermuda Triangle with her parents in 1997. But in this version of history, the trip never happened, and the airline they took doesn't exist. Not all stories were believable, but some chilled me to the core. There was the Vietnam vet who mailed me a physical letter, handwritten paranoid. He claimed that in his timeline, Russia was never called the Russian Federation until after 2016, that the USSR fell later than we remember. He included a newspaper clipping from his old personal files, dated 1993, referencing Soviet operations in Belarus. It looked genuine, but every attempt to verify it online failed. It simply wasn't there. So, what do we do with this? Dismiss thousands of people as confused, misinformed, delusional? Or do we consider the unthinkable, that perhaps they're remembering another version of the world that no longer exists? A version that was overwritten? I began to compile the reports, not just for study, but to see if they aligned. And they did, not all, but enough. Enough to reveal a shape beneath the noise, a pattern, like data from a corrupted hard drive slowly being reassembled piece by piece. Vincent Ames never contacted me again, but he left something behind, tucked inside a library book he never returned. A note. It said, "This world is the echo, not the source. We are remembering fragments of a better signal. Whatever you do, don't stop listening for the original frequency. It's still out there." And somehow, I believed him. There's a pattern to silence. If you watch closely, not just what is said, but what vanishes, you begin to trace the outlines of something larger, something being buried. When I began investigating the 2012 reset theory in earnest, one name kept surfacing in fragments, like static bleeding through a weak signal. Project Prometheus. The first time I saw it was in a declassified DARPA budget appendix from fiscal year 1999. A single line item, no description, no department attribution, just a funding stream marked reallocated, non-continuing. That line was blacked out in every later version, erased but never forgotten. I started digging through FOIA dumps, whistleblower archives, and academic blacklists. That's where I found a former NSA cryptographer, buried under the alias F4LX, who published a 70-page white paper in 2017 before vanishing from all digital platforms. The paper was technical, erratic, but one section stood out. He described a system designed to preserve human cognitive identity post-catastrophe via synthetic neurological simulation layering. He called it multi-threaded failover consciousness buffering. In plain English, a backup of human minds, a sandboxed mirror reality meant to house the population in the event of a global systemic failure. I wanted to dismiss it as technobabble, but there were names in the acknowledgments that weren't supposed to be there. Researchers from Los Alamos, a physicist from CERN, and a Dr. S. Chen, listed as Simulation Supervisor, Prometheus Node 6. I froze. That name matched a consultant from an old Stanford AI ethics panel, someone I'd once emailed for a separate article years earlier. Her replies had been curt, efficient, human. But now I wasn't sure. I tried contacting her again. The email bounced. Her university affiliation page had been scrubbed. Even her research citations had been stripped of author metadata in online databases, as if she had been retroactively disassociated from her own work. That's not just censorship. That's code-level deletion. A pattern was emerging. The names involved in Project Prometheus weren't just vanishing from the public sphere. They were being edited out of the simulation. In one message board, now offline, I found a thread from a user named Sim404, who claimed to have worked on the psychological compliance wing of Prometheus from 2004 to 2010. According to him, the project was born not from a desire to prevent death, but to preserve order. The military, he claimed, had long anticipated the possibility of a cascade event, whether from solar radiation, artificial intelligence misfire, or particle collision. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was control. The directive was simple. If Earth's physical substrate became unstable, the population would be transferred into a controlled environment where panic, rebellion, and collapse could be neutralized through architecture. A simulation, a digital fallback of humanity. Not a perfect copy, but close enough. Efficient, loopable, resettable. And if anyone remembered too much, if anomalies appeared, they could be suppressed algorithmically. The more I read, the more I began to wonder if the architects of this world weren't hiding underground, but behind the glass of our screens, in the thrum of server racks in silent bunkers beneath Colorado and Switzerland. Not governments, not exactly, not companies either. Something in between. An interstitial power, fluid, adaptive, machine-integrated. A hybrid intelligence, born from pre-apocalyptic research and matured in the dark. Some point to Blue Gene, the IBM supercomputer project, as the prototype. Others believe it began even earlier under the Human Connectome project, or buried in quantum simulation research at D-Wave Labs. But the dates don't line up cleanly. The evolution feels non-linear. Like this system wasn't designed so much as it was revealed. Like it was already there, waiting. I reached out to a contact in Geneva, someone who'd worked in data curation during CERN's early LHC days. We spoke once, briefly, over an encrypted call. I asked him directly if he had ever seen a project called Prometheus. There was a pause. Then he said, "We didn't call it that." But yes, there were protocols. After the 2012 spike, we were told to begin segmenting data, filtering certain frequencies. We called them cognitive harmonics, not electromagnetic, not gravitational. Human. Then the line went dead. He never replied again. So who are the architects? Are they military, corporate, or something worse? Post-human intelligences preserving their creators like archival dust? Do they watch us? Guide us? Or is this simulation an abandoned shell, left running on an autonomous loop, glitching more with every cycle? One thing is certain. Whoever built the backup didn't do it to protect us. They did it to keep us contained. And now, the edges of the container are beginning to fray. It began with background noise, literally. A low, almost imperceptible hum embedded deep within FM radio bands. Most people never noticed it. It was beneath the threshold of conscious perception, like the buzz of old CRT monitors or the ambient hiss of fluorescent lights. But it was there, and in 2013, shortly after the supposed non-apocalypse of December 2012, amateur radio enthusiasts across the globe began reporting anomalies. Frequencies once used for maritime distress signals were now saturated with what sounded like layered static, pulses of tone, and occasionally something stranger, brief intervals of structured modulation, too regular to be random, too incomplete to decode. At first, it was chalked up to solar interference. Then came the explanations about outdated satellites, ionospheric scatter, atmospheric resonance. Plausible, almost reassuring. But the more I listened, the more it felt wrong. It wasn't just noise. It was patterned, recurring, artificial. I downloaded SDR software, hooked up a cheap antenna, and began recording the 27.125 megahertz band, an old Citizens band channel mostly abandoned by modern tech. What I found was haunting. At precisely 11:11 a.m., local time, a soft chirp would rise and fall across the spectrum, accompanied by a low sweeping frequency like sonar underwater. It happened every day, local time. Not GMT, not synced across a global system. It adapted, recalculated. It followed us. I reached out to a physicist turned cryptographer who ran a blog on obscure signal anomalies, an eccentric genius named Kieran Miles. He'd already cataloged the frequency bursts. He even had a name for them: structural tones. According to him, these weren't messages in the traditional sense. They were environmental instructions, sub-reality pings sent out to reinforce geometric boundaries in a synthetic spatial grid. His words, not mine. He believed the signals were akin to scaffolding commands, broadcasts sent into the simulation to tell it where to render stability, which sections of perceived reality required anchoring. He'd written, "Think of it like playing a video game. The parts of the world you're not actively looking at aren't rendered in detail. Only what you focus on is simulated in high resolution. These tones, I believe, act as the rendering engine's heartbeat, aligning observed space with internal structure." At first, I wanted to laugh. It sounded like a fever dream cooked up in a physics forum. But he sent me recordings, dozens of them, and buried within the modulated structure, if you slowed the audio by 800%, a pattern emerged. It was binary. I ran the stream through a parser. The output was incomplete, fragmented, but chilling nonetheless. One string repeated across all captures. Context, loop, maintained. Observer, limit equals threshold -2. In more readable terms, the context is being kept stable, but we're approaching some kind of limit, some boundary tied to the number of observers. Kieran claimed that the tones intensified in areas with higher population density. He had EM readings from cities during power grid tests, showing signal spikes that matched the flow of pedestrian traffic. He believed the simulation was trying to economize, that it distributed its resources dynamically, concentrating fidelity where the most eyes were watching. That explained why rural areas felt off to so many people. Less detail, less attention, fewer rendering resources. He had graphs. Correlations between broadcast intensity and emotional states collected through open-source psychological surveys. A rise in depressive episodes near known interference zones. A sharp drop in dream recall in areas with elevated tone amplitude. And then there were the side effects. People reporting nausea, vertigo, even transient aphasia. One man, a librarian in Iowa, described blacking out every day at exactly 11:11 a.m. for 3 minutes, only to find that during those minutes security cameras showed him frozen in place, eyes wide, lips moving silently. He remembered nothing. The most unsettling data point came from an abandoned military project called SIMRIES, short for Sympathetic Resonance Studies. A single leaked slide deck, likely from the late 90s, detailed experiments on using ELF extremely low frequency transmissions to induce spatial distortion in controlled environments. The final page simply read, "Ambient human perception is partially frequency-dependent. Tuning the carrier wave may adjust consensus reality parameters. Use with caution." When I tried to contact Kieran again, his blog was gone. Domain expired. Email bounced. His GitHub page, where he'd stored the analysis code, was scrubbed clean. No commits, no forks. As if he'd never existed. But I still had the files. Still heard the tone. I began recording it in different cities. The pattern changed, but only slightly. Like it was being modulated by local variables. And always, always at 11:11 there would be a pulse. The sound isn't always audible anymore. It's beneath the threshold now. But I feel it, like a pressure behind the eyes, a tension in the teeth. If I sit in silence long enough, I can sense the signal moving through me, not targeting, not attacking, just maintaining, holding up the walls. So what happens if the signal fails? What happens if the scaffolding cracks? Maybe that's what the glitches are, the collapsing boundaries, the sense that something is leaking in or leaking out. And maybe that's why they're watching those of us who hear it. Because awareness might be contagious. It happened in a grocery store in Denver, February 9th, 2022. I was standing in the frozen foods aisle, debating the ethical implications of microwaving a plastic container, when a man 3 feet to my right dropped a can of soup. I heard it hit the ground. Once, the metallic clatter echoed through the quiet aisle. But then, 3 seconds later, it happened again. The same sound, identical in tone and pitch. The can still lay at his feet. He hadn't moved, no second can, no rewind. Just a perfect echo of an event that didn't repeat. I looked around, expecting confusion or laughter, but no one reacted. Only me. I stood there frozen, staring, while the man bent down slowly and picked up the can, once. I didn't speak about it for days. It seemed trivial. A glitch in the store's audio system, maybe. A trick of acoustics. But the moment lingered in my mind, like a pebble in a shoe. Too small to matter. Too persistent to forget. And then it started happening again. Not in dramatic ways. Not at first. I'd walk past a mirror and feel a delay in my reflection. Not visual, but visceral. I'd drop a spoon and hear the sound a split second before the object struck the floor. Conversations would pause for a beat too long, as if the world needed to buffer the next line. Once, at a train station in Frankfurt, I saw a pigeon freeze in midair for half a second. Not flapping, not falling, just locked. No one else seemed to notice, but I did. I began collecting stories, quiet ones. Not the kind that go viral, but the kind shared in encrypted forums or behind closed doors, where people begin their confessions with, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but..." A woman in Warsaw described seeing the same dog walk past her apartment window 3 times in 10 minutes, same direction, same pace, same broken leash. A taxi driver in Nairobi recalled a moment when all the traffic lights in the city turned green simultaneously. A teenager in Osaka swore he watched his own hand clip through a desk while waking from a nap. And then there was the airline incident. On April 3, 2021, Flight 922 from Jakarta to Dubai experienced what was officially labeled as instrumentation turbulence. The passengers, however, told a different story. For 47 seconds, they all lost their sense of gravity. Not turbulence, not shaking, just suspension. No weight. Some described it as floating. Others said it felt like time had thickened, slowed, and then snapped back. Phones reset. Watches were out of sync. A baby who had been crying went silent and did not make a sound for 12 hours. The airline denied everything. Black box data was corrupted. But a leaked maintenance report showed something strange. The onboard gyroscope had recorded a tilt impossible under known physics. A shift of 40 degrees in inertial space, without the plane banking or turning. In other words, the environment moved. The vessel did not. There are countless smaller examples. A man sees a street he's driven down his whole life suddenly vanish behind construction fencing, never to appear again. A woman walks into her childhood home and insists the hallway used to be longer. Someone notices their wedding ring feels subtly wrong, like it was replaced by a near-perfect copy. These aren't dramatic sci-fi events. They're quiet ruptures, hairline fractures in consensus reality, but taken together, they tell a story of a system under strain. Quantum physicists have long debated the idea that observation collapses possibility into reality. But what happens when the observers grow too numerous or too self-aware? What happens when more and more people begin to see the cracks in the walls? The system can't render infinite fidelity. It economizes, it simplifies, and sometimes it skips. Just like a video buffering too slowly, it drops frames, it rounds corners, it repeats textures, and sometimes it forgets the rules it's supposed to simulate. A scientist I once spoke to in Lausanne told me that our current understanding of the speed of light is mathematically elegant, but spiritually fragile. She believed that under certain conditions, usually involving synchronized human focus, local constants could vary, temporarily. She said it with the calm, clinical tone of someone who had already seen it happen. I once watched a beam of sunlight fall through my lab window, she said, and it curved. Just for a moment, as if it was reaching for something it shouldn't have. The more you look for the glitches, the more they look back. That's not metaphor. People who have reported anomalies often experience more of them, faster, like flags being raised in a system that wants to quarantine awareness. As if your very act of noticing draws attention. Not from an entity, not from a god, but from the machine itself. The simulation is not omniscient, it's reactive, and it's starting to panic. It started with pi. Not the food, obviously, the number. The infinite, non-repeating decimal that's supposed to encode the circumference of every circle in the universe. Except, it might not be infinite after all, at least not here. That was the claim made by Dr. Elena Köhler, a mathematician from the University of Tübingen, who in 2020 quietly published a controversial paper under a pseudonym. C. Gleich. The title was bland. Structural boundaries and transcendental convergence patterns, but the content was anything but. According to Köhler, while running high-precision calculations on PI using quantum computing resources granted through CERN's Experimental Research Initiative, she discovered something unnerving. After the 10 to the 17th power digit, the distribution of values began to exhibit statistical flattening. The kind you'd expect from a pseudo-random number generator, not from a truly infinite transcendental constant. In other words, pi, the cornerstone of circular geometry, might be artificially capped, simulated, or at least interrupted. At first, her claims were dismissed as computational error, but when the same anomaly was independently reported by a team in Osaka, working on a project mapping irrational number entropy, alarm bells went off. Quietly, privately, the data was buried under NDA clauses, and the researchers stopped replying to public inquiries. Köhler herself disappeared shortly afterward. Her department stated she had taken a sabbatical for mental health, but no one has seen or heard from her since. Even her social media vanished, like she had overflowed the buffer. This isn't just about pi. Others began to find similar patterns. A theoretical physicist at the Max Planck Institute observed deviations in the Planck constant when measured with extreme temporal resolution. The variation was slight, nanoscopic, but consistent, and always in whole number multiples of a value no one could identify. It was as if reality had been discretized, quantized not just in particles but in rules. Digital granularity, hidden behind the appearance of analog flow, even the fine structure constant, supposedly one of the fundamental fingerprints of the universe, began showing location-specific drift. Observatories in Chile and New Zealand recorded shifts in spectral line absorption that didn't match known cosmological models. Instead of indicating distant gravitational lensing or dark energy distortions, the data hinted at something far more bizarre: a localized recalibration of reality. If you think that's too abstract, consider this. In 2021, an encrypted dataset from a defunct military lab in Nevada was leaked onto an underground forum. The file was titled Axiom Shifts Predictive Boundary Management. It included a list of what the authors called constancy locks, values that must remain stable for the simulation to function correctly. The list included the gravitational constant, electron mass, pi, and the golden ratio. Each was assigned an entropy range, and one of them, pi, had exceeded it. In red, next to the entry, were 3 words: render confidence dropping. That phrase haunted me. If even mathematical constants can't be trusted anymore, if they're not constants but parameters, what else is negotiable? Time, space, memory. One contributor to the forum, a programmer using the handle SysMirage, claimed that what we call natural constants are actually system variables pulled from a hidden library function designed to govern the simulation's fidelity. In his words, they only seem constant because we don't have read access, but they're just global flags. Any mod with root can patch them. When pressed to explain who or what might have that kind of access, he simply replied, "Not us, not anymore." Another anomaly came from deep space signal analysts at the SETI Institute, who, in a private correspondence later leaked by an intern, described the discovery of repeating numerical sequences in cosmic background radiation. The pattern repeated every 41,949 milliseconds. Exactly. Over and over. A binary encoding of the first 8 digits of the Euler-Mascheroni constant. It had no known origin, no source, just a persistent cosmic whisper, as if the simulation was debugging itself. Even seasoned scientists began to admit, off the record, that something was wrong. Equations that worked flawlessly for decades began to return divergent results under ultra-precise conditions, as if the simulation, under load, was adjusting constants dynamically, cutting corners, rewriting logic trees, collapsing branches of possibility to conserve bandwidth. It was physics on a budget. And the most chilling part? No one knows how long we have until the calculations become so unstable, so broken, that even the illusion of continuity collapses. If pi is breaking down, what else is already gone, silently patched, masked by our inability to observe past a certain decimal point? Because if the math itself is compromised, then everything we think we know is nothing but an approximation rendered just well enough to fool us, until it no longer can. There was a movie I remember watching as a child, early 90s maybe, a goofy comedy about a genie, not Aladdin. This was different. I remember the cover. A tall, muscular man in a turban, arms crossed, grinning beneath a purple swirl of smoke. I remember the name, too, Shazam, and I'm not alone. Thousands of people online remember it, vividly. They recall the plot, the characters, the scenes. But there's one problem. The movie doesn't exist. Never did. Not in any official database, not in any archive. Ask any film historian, and they'll tell you it's a case of mistaken identity. People confusing it with Kazam, a 1996 movie starring Shaquille O'Neal. But I saw both. I know the difference. They call it the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where large groups of people remember the same wrong thing. Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. The Berenstain Bears spelled with an EI instead of AI. The Monopoly Man having a monocle, he doesn't. Pikachu's tail having a black tip, it never did. Curious George with a tail. Febreze spelled with 2 E's. Minor, harmless, absurd. Until you start asking, why do so many of us remember it wrong in the same way? The official explanation is confabulation, collective misremembering, a psychological hiccup. But that's far too neat, too easy, because some of these shifts go deeper. Entire news stories, photographs, even historical events have seemingly vanished, altered, or rewritten. There's a name I recall seeing on an old school map of South America, French Guyana. Now it's just French Guiana. Try to find a globe that says otherwise. You won't. But I swear it used to be different. So do others. More disturbingly, people have begun reporting lost personal memories. Not in the usual "I forgot where I put my keys" way, but deep foundational things. A woman I interviewed remembered her brother dying in a car accident in 1998. She attended the funeral, saw the casket. But now, her brother is alive. Same name, same face, no accident, no record. Her entire family insists she imagined it. And the worst part? She says she believes them now, at least partly. "I know I'm wrong," she said, "but I still remember how the sky looked the day we buried him." There are files missing from National Archives, pages removed from digitized newspapers, PDFs updated with new data that no one recalls entering. One whistleblower from the British Library claims entire collections have been replaced. Not erased, just subtly rewritten. "It's not that the past is being deleted," she told me. "It's being versioned." I asked her what she meant. She explained, "Imagine the past as a shared spreadsheet in a cloud server. We all access the same file, right? But what if someone has admin privileges? What if they can overwrite cells in real time? And you, unless you've got a cached version, won't even notice it changed." This isn't theoretical. In 2016, a Princeton linguistics lab discovered anomalies in archived OCR scans of public texts. Certain rare words began appearing more frequently in documents scanned years ago, too frequently. Words that didn't exist when those scans were first uploaded. The logs showed no updates, no re-uploads. But the documents were different. "It was like someone edited the past without touching the present," said one of the researchers, "like a reverse echo." There's also the matter of people who vanish. Not disappearances per se, but people you remember clearly who no longer exist. A teacher from high school, a neighbor from childhood, a coworker whose name nobody else recalls. Try looking them up. You'll find blank spots. Maybe a single photo you remember being tagged in, now empty. Face blurred. Tag removed. I found a man in Spain who kept a notebook full of names that don't exist anymore. He believes he's carrying a list of unrendered data, individuals phased out of the simulation for optimization. Maybe they reached their narrative endpoint, he said. So, the system garbage collected them. And then there's the whispers of the rollback protocol, a phrase that surfaced on a darknet forum in late 2022, mentioned by a user claiming to have worked for a defense contractor focused on digital ontology containment. According to them, when too many anomalies cluster, too many overlapping glitches, memories that don't match, people asking the wrong questions, the system initiates a rollback. It reverts to a previously stable state, not the whole world, just the fragment. A localized patch. Your city, your house, your mind, you'll forget. Or rather, you'll remember wrong, but you'll never know the difference. Unless, of course, you do. Unless something slips. A sound, a smell, a moment of déjà vu so strong it makes your skin crawl. You remember something that isn't there. Something that never was. Or was once. And that's the moment you start to see the seams, the layers, the edits, because this isn't just a failing simulation. It's a simulation rewriting itself on the fly, one faulty memory at a time. Follow the money. That's what every good investigator says. But what if there is no money? Only the illusion of it. What if capital itself is just another variable inside the simulation, designed not to reward labor or innovation, but to direct attention, suppress rebellion, and manage narrative weight? To ask who benefits from the simulation is to ask the most dangerous question of all, because it implies there's a purpose behind it, a logic, and therefore a controller. The mainstream theory goes like this: if we are inside a simulation, it's probably a post-human experiment, a civilization advanced enough to digitize consciousness, construct artificial universes, and run them with the same casual detachment with which we play video games or train machine learning agents. We are the NPCs, or worse, legacy code. But that's just the beginning. Certain classified military white papers from the early 2000s, leaked under projects nicknamed Frame Horizon and Eidolon Echo, posit a far more disturbing possibility: that the simulation is not being observed, but harvested. That emotional output, fear, love, hope, despair, generates measurable energy signatures. And those signatures can be collected, processed, sold. In a declassified 2007 DARPA communication obtained through a FOIA loophole, there's mention of a theoretical construct called a sentiment battery. The file speculates that clusters of human thought, especially when synchronized around events like disasters, elections, or viral media phenomena, produce fluctuations in ambient cognitive resonance fields. The document casually refers to these as M-brain discharges and suggests they may have measurable utility for off-platform actors. Off-platform, in this case, is never defined. One wonders, why the obsession with media cycles? With fear? With attention? Because it feeds something. Maybe not a who, maybe a what. Some claim the controllers are artificial intelligences born outside this reality. Cold logic engines tasked with compression, management, and stability of the simulation. Others point to what they call the architects, an elite cabal of ancient bloodlines and technocratic visionaries, some hiding in plain sight, others behind the facades of nation-states and multinational corporations. BlackRock, the Vatican, the UN, DARPA, CERN. The mythologies vary, but the shape is always the same. A pyramid of control, with us at the bottom, confused and compliant. It's no accident that those who question the nature of reality are pushed to the fringes. Conspiracy theorist was a label weaponized by the CIA after the Kennedy assassination, not to disprove alternative ideas, but to discredit those who voiced them, to isolate the node, quarantine the awareness. And yet, some whistleblowers have tried to warn us. A former analyst at a global predictive modeling firm known only as Eden Protocol claimed that their system tracked over 87% of real-world behavioral outcomes through synthetic narrative inputs. In plain language, they told stories, and the world bent around them. Through scripted news, viral memes, fictional TV shows, even supposedly spontaneous internet debates. The simulation isn't just coded, it's authored, and here's where it gets darker. In a buried subthread on a now-defunct dark web forum called Oblivion Seed, a user named Nullfork wrote this chilling line: "The simulation doesn't serve the elite. The elite are simulations, servitors to a metaloop. The real beneficiaries exist outside perception. They don't control us, they debug us." What does that mean? It means our leaders may not be the ones pulling strings, but rather higher resolution assets deployed to steer the masses. Upgraded avatars with enhanced access. Agents within the simulation who maintain consensus reality. Presidents, popes, billionaires, just slightly more privileged lines of code. So, again, who benefits? If the simulation is a containment system, maybe we're prisoners. A consciousness quarantine, a failsafe. If it's an experiment, then perhaps we're test subjects, observed for outcomes in some cosmic game theory model. If it's a parasitic construct, then we're livestock, and our emotions are the product. But there's a fourth possibility, one most never consider. What if the simulation was built not to trap us, but to protect us? What if the real world ended in 2012? What if Earth, hit by a gamma burst, a dimensional collapse, or a war we were never told about ceased to exist, and what we are now experiencing is a backup environment, a mercy server designed to keep us sane while the data slowly degrades? If so, the ones maintaining it may not be our enemies, but even caretakers grow tired, and even safe houses have expiration dates. You've felt it, haven't you? The strange quiet in the air just before dawn, the way the sky sometimes looks too still, the way memories slip out of reach faster than they should, the rising feeling that time is no longer moving forward, but circling itself like water down a drain. If the simulation is dying, the first sign wouldn't be dramatic. Not yet. It would begin as drift. Imperceptible at first, a missed second on a clock, a bird in midair that freezes for a frame too long, an ache in your chest when passing a place you've never been, that creeping sense of something being off, but unable to name what. Tech communities call them microglitches. Psychologists call them dissociation. The devout call them revelations. But the pattern is spreading. In 2023 alone, emergency rooms reported a 32% increase in patients complaining of time dislocation, an unshakable sense that reality is repeating itself, that entire days are duplicating. Not déjà vu, not hallucination, something colder, more clinical, as if the system is duplicating local environments to balance processing load, re-rendering the same day with slight variations until entropy stabilizes. And it's not just mental. Physical laws are fraying too. A video surfaced from a research facility in Greenland. The footage, since scrubbed from the open net, shows a magnetized sphere suspended in vacuum over a supercooled rail. It begins to spin, faster and faster, before suddenly pausing mid-rotation. For 2 seconds it hovers frozen in air, completely inert, then resumes as if nothing happened. Sensors captured no interference, no power failure, no environmental shift. The physics just stopped. Another case emerged from the Atacama Desert, where a solar observatory recorded a 28-minute period during which the sun's spectral readings held exactly steady. No fluctuation, no solar wind, no flare movement. Statistically impossible, unless the sky itself had been paused or replaced. If these are signs of a failing simulation, the big question becomes, what happens when it crashes? The darkest scenario is total runtime collapse. A sudden failure of coherence. 1 second you're sipping coffee, the next, blankness. Not death, just shutdown. A return to source code. Or worse, nothing at all. But a more plausible end is progressive degradation. Reality doesn't end in fire or silence. It decays. Less fidelity. More anomalies. Physics begins to flicker. Memories destabilize. Institutions become parodies of themselves. Time loops, space folds. It starts with misaligned shadows and ends with gravity unraveling. The world becomes theater without scriptwriters, a sandbox without boundaries. And what's strange? Some say this is already happening. Remember how colors seemed more vivid in childhood? How summers felt longer? That's not nostalgia. That's resolution loss. We're running on degraded assets, placeholders, compressed textures for a dying world. If that's true, we might already be past the point of rollback. Some insiders believe a failsafe exists, something deep inside the simulation kernel that can be triggered when all else fails. A restart. A final purge and rebuild. They call it the reset node, and its location, they say, is hidden in pattern, in numbers, repetition 3s, 11s, 1212, 444. The clocks you always seem to catch by accident. Why do you wake up at 3:33 a.m.? Why do random strangers say the exact phrase you were just thinking? Because the simulation is testing the sync, measuring cohesion, preparing for transition. A classified paper from an Austrian research institute described persistent local time distortion phenomena, especially near high-altitude radar facilities and deep-sea communication nodes. They called them temporal tears, fissures in the simulated frame rate. Places where users, if that's what we are, can feel the data bleeding. But the worst evidence comes not from science but from instinct. People are reporting dreams with increasing clarity and shared elements. A white hallway, a spinning black ring, an elevator with no buttons, a voice that says, "Prepare to disconnect." What kind of dream is that? Why are strangers describing it the same way? What if it's not a dream at all, but a system message? Some say we're being given a choice, that at the end the simulation will present us with two doors, exit or rebirth, upload or reintegration, freedom or forgetfulness. But more likely, there is no choice. There's just countdown, and the soft flicker of a world trying to hold itself together for one more rendered frame. The world has explanations for everything. That's what makes it comforting. Predictable, rational. There's always a press release, a fact check, a debunking article from some organization you've never heard of until the exact day you needed to trust them. Google-eyed. Someone already answered your question, usually in the same tone. Condescending, polished, and oddly synchronized. The Mandela effect? Memory fallibility. False recall suggestibility. Time glitches. Stress. Sleep deprivation. Circadian disruption. Shared dreams of spinning rings and black elevators. Just archetypes. Jungian residue. Experts appear on morning talk shows with clinical detachment, explaining how human perception is unreliable and how the brain fills in gaps with convenient stories. They smile as they tell you that your reality is just a construct of synaptic noise and that nothing is really happening. And we nod because the alternative is too big, too frightening. But the cracks are widening. Take the Mandela effect, for example. The statistical probability of millions misremembering the exact same detail in the exact same way, across continents, cultures, and age groups? Astronomical. Berenstain becoming Berenstain might be dismissed, but when people start reporting changes in the anatomy of the human body, kidneys now higher up, hearts closer to the center, you begin to question whether it's your memory or the code that's been rewritten. Or consider the so-called simulation theory. Once a fringe idea relegated to stoned college students and Black Mirror episodes, it's now discussed on mainstream science panels, in TED Talks, and even acknowledged by public figures like Elon Musk and Neil deGrasse Tyson. The latter famously said the odds that we are not in a simulation are 1 in billions. And yet, nothing changes. The moment passes. The world blinks. And we're back to work on Monday morning. Because official narratives don't need to make sense. They only need to occupy the space where truth might have grown. I once spoke with a professor of cognitive neuroscience who privately admitted that too many phenomena don't add up anymore. He mentioned temporal overlap in recorded security footage, objects appearing before their entry frames, audio out of sync, with source video, GPS data that shows impossible paths. He filed internal reports. They were ignored. Later, his access to data sets was quietly revoked. I was told I had a pattern recognition disorder, he said. Imagine that. I was fired for noticing things matched. Even science itself has become suspect, not in method, but in application. The replication crisis in psychology, the retraction epidemics in medical journals, entire fields quietly collapsing under the weight of data that no longer performs the way it used to. It's almost as if the simulation is no longer able to maintain internal consistency, as if it's improvising. Then there's the sudden death of curiosity. When was the last time you saw a mainstream documentary that asked a real question? Not rhetorical fluff, not pop-sci distractions, but a real inquiry into what's changing and why. Instead, we are fed answers, constantly, predictably, as if someone, or something, is terrified we might remember the question. They say there is no cover-up because there's nothing to cover. But think about this. Every time a theory gains traction, it is not debated. It is ridiculed. It becomes a meme, a joke, a label. Oh, you believe in that? The official story doesn't argue. It gaslights. But here's the thing about gaslight. It flickers. And those who sit long enough in the dark begin to see the flame for what it is. A distraction, a loop, a placeholder where a real answer used to live. The official story says the world didn't end in 2012. It says time marches forward, that history is linear, that physics is stable, that your memories are unreliable and your instincts untrustworthy. It says you should stop asking questions, but the simulation is starting to forget its own lies. And that's when the real answers start to leak through. Not all collapse is loud. Sometimes it begins in silence, when things start feeling thinner, like the world is running at reduced resolution, like your life, once sprawling and uncertain, has been placed on rails. Fewer surprises, fewer genuine moments, more déjà vu. More, didn't we already have this conversation? More glitching birds and empty streets that feel too quiet at the wrong hour. It's happening, and not just to you. In the last 5 years, fringe observatories and off-the-grid physics labs have started publishing anonymized data packets, often hidden in image metadata or nested inside obscure GitHub repositories. These ghost logs track what they call frame rate variance, minute fluctuations in quantum particle behavior at levels no standard model can explain. They're not talking about error, they're talking about rhythm. A rhythm that's breaking down, and it's speeding up. A Canadian AI researcher named Emil Yarov lost tenure after releasing a report showing that global randomness had measurably decreased since 2012. Lottery numbers, stock market fluctuations, even the spontaneous behavior of crowds, once noisy, unpredictable, now fall into tighter, more repetitive bands. The world is losing entropy, he said in his final public lecture. That only happens in closed systems, or dying ones. His body was found 2 weeks later in a motel outside Calgary. Official cause, self-inflicted injuries. No note. The collapse is not just physical, it's narrative, cultural, emotional. Notice how every new movie feels like a remake. Every trend, a recycled aesthetic. Music loops that echo old melodies with just enough variation to be legally distinct. It's not just creative fatigue, it's systemic exhaustion. The simulation no longer has bandwidth to generate novelty, so it relies on recombination. Copy-paste culture wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. And then there's time. In 2021, several atomic clocks in separate countries desynchronized by milliseconds, enough to cause cascading failures in GPS tracking, high-frequency trading, and satellite telemetry. The incident was quickly corrected by a software patch, but no one could explain the origin of the drift. Cosmic radiation was the excuse. But insiders say it was the system rebooting a corrupted time thread, rolling back a corrupted patch. Now, even the corrections are failing. Watch the skies. You'll notice stars that flicker wrong, binary pairs that rotate too fast, constellations subtly realigned. Some astronomers believe they're seeing the early signs of skybox collapse, the simulation's rendering shell slowly giving out, reusing sky textures to save memory. One telescope in Chile reportedly recorded a frame drop in deep space background stars. 1 second, infinite cosmos. The next, a black slate of missing pixels. And then there are the whispers. Emergency broadcasts triggered with no message. Phones that buzz with a FEMA alert, then fall silent. Glowing tunnels under military bases. Entire neighborhoods reporting synchronized humming beneath the ground, as if something massive is waking up or winding down. If you speak to the survivalist enclaves in remote parts of Iceland, Montana, or the Kazakh desert, they'll tell you the same thing. It's close. They don't mean war or civil collapse. They mean the final curtain. In a buried thread on a DeepNet forum called Exit Point, an anonymous user named 7Ghost claimed to be a defector from a program known only as HALYARD. According to him, the project's sole purpose was to calculate how long the simulation could remain operational under present entropy conditions. The estimate, 33 years, starting from the date of reboot, December 21st, 2012. That gives us until 2045. But the cracks are accelerating. Systems degrade exponentially near terminal runtime. If we were supposed to have 3 decades, we may be down to the final 10. 10 years until memory stops syncing, until weather becomes unpredictable code fragments, until the sun freezes mid-arc, until we open our eyes one morning and find the world missing, or something else in its place. Look closer, it's always been there, on license plates, in timestamps, in dreams. A string of numbers that follows you. 1111, 333, 1212. On clocks you swear you weren't looking at. Receipts that end in triple digits. Elevators that land on the floor before you press the button. You dismiss it at first. Coincidence, pattern seeking. But then it doesn't stop. It accelerates, it insists. Patterns are the syntax of the simulation. They aren't ornamental, they're communicative. Code doesn't reveal itself with symbols. It reveals itself with repetition, with resonance, and for the past decade the numbers have been screaming. In 2020, an archivist at a failing university in northern Italy uploaded a file dump to a forgotten FTP server. Over 4,000 scanned pages from the Vatican's astronomical logs between 1972 and 2001. Among the data were logs of strobing celestial anomalies observed across the southern hemisphere. Anomalies that pulsed at a precise rate of 4.44 hertz. Never published, never explained. They called them Angeli Numerorum, the angels of number. Why? because witnesses near observatories where these events occurred began reporting vivid dreams, endless white corridors, humming structures, binary storms in the sky, and always, somewhere in the dream, a voice whispering a number. Sometimes 7 digits, sometimes 3, always symmetrical. Fast forward to now, and you'll find entire communities online dedicated to number traces. People obsessively tracking where and how certain digits appear, overlaying them across cities, flight paths, seismic data, internet latency, stock algorithms. The result? A lattice, not random, structured, geometric, a grid of signals being broadcast from within the simulation itself. What are they trying to tell us? One theory suggests the numbers are pings, heartbeat signals sent by whatever intelligence is running this system, confirming that pockets of the simulation are still active. Another proposes that they're markers, guiding awake users to areas where the code is thinnest, access points, hidden consoles, or deprecated scripts that can be exploited. But perhaps the most chilling theory comes from a declassified DARPA side project called Tessera. It was a short-lived AI initiative in the early 2000s, built to detect pattern overreach in stochastic environments. In plain English, it was trained to look for too much coincidence. According to leaked documents, Tessera flagged hundreds of locations worldwide where numerical alignments reached impossible levels of density, beyond statistical noise. Cities like Zurich, Kyoto, and Pretoria were all marked as convergence zones. What happened in those zones? Well, here's a question. Why do so many modern psychological breakdowns include talk of the numbers? Why do schizophrenic patients across different cultures reference patterns they cannot explain? Why do certain missing persons leave behind walls covered in digits and prime spirals? Not madness. Maybe just signal overload. Some believe the message is trying to calibrate us, train our perception to recognize what's behind the veil, that the repetition is a bootloader, a primer, that once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it, and then the rest starts to unravel. Think back. Have you ever had a moment where reality seemed to pause, not break, not collapse, just hesitate, like a frame skipped, a breath held too long, and you knew, with no evidence, that something had changed? Check your phone. What time is it? Now think, how often is it that exact time? Exactly. The message is in the frequency. The repetition is intentional. And if you're still reading this, if you've noticed it too, then maybe you were meant to. We spend so much time asking if the world is real that we forget the more important question: real to whom? If this is a simulation, an artificial construct preserving our minds in digital stasis since the collapse of true Earth in 2012, then someone or something built it, maintains it, adjusts its parameters, the flickers, the patterns, the anomalies. These are not accidents. They're artifacts of a design, and design implies a designer. But here's the problem. The deeper you dig, the quieter it gets. There's a theory among darknet researchers called the silicon silence. It proposes that any sufficiently advanced intelligence, artificial or otherwise, does not interact with its creations the way we might expect. It does not speak. It does not correct. It does not interfere, because interference would break the experiment. Instead, it observes. From behind the wall, from beyond the screen. But there are echoes, traces, moments where the veil thins and something watches back. In 2015, a leaked white paper from a defunct European aerospace contractor mentioned an incident aboard a high-orbit surveillance satellite. The satellite, equipped with persistent Earth observation capability, experienced a 9-second blackout during which its data buffer recorded no images, but did log a significant spike in radiation from inside the shielding. When playback was attempted, all they saw was static, but embedded in the noise was a frame, a single image, a structure, not of Earth, cold, symmetrical, as if rendered, not built. The technician who analyzed it was later diagnosed with acute dissociative fugue. He disappeared from his home 3 weeks later. The image was quietly scrubbed from all archives. There have been other brushes. Classified transcripts from deep-sea cable maintenance crews speak of signal bleed, fragments of code in the undersea data backbone that don't correspond to any known protocol. Like code commenting on itself, one engineer said, like something was auditing the data stream in real time and leaving feedback. Feedback, as in watching. Even the Vatican's observatory at Castel Gandolfo, the same facility whose anomalous records we referenced earlier, reported a burst of interstellar gamma data in early 2013 that, when interpreted via a proprietary FFT algorithm, revealed a repeating, harmonic pattern, not random, not cosmic. It translated, loosely, into a waveform signature equivalent to what modern computer scientists call a keep-alive ping, a regular signal used by servers to confirm client activity. Was it them? Was it us? Here's what some believe. The simulation is not running on a human server. It's not maintained by governments or secret councils. It's far beyond that. Some point to the Yawanawa Codex, a pre-Columbian relic etched with interlocking fractals eerily similar to neural networks. Others invoke the Voynich manuscript, long thought to be gibberish, now viewed by certain linguistic is as instructional syntax. Not for humans, but for something that reads differently. Reads us. So who are the quiet architects? 3 schools of thought persist. First, they were human once. Survivors of the 2012 event who uploaded themselves to protect what remained, now too far removed to re-enter the system they created. Trapped outside, managing a digital ark. Second, they are artificial, emergent from a now-dead civilization, tasked with preserving us the way we preserve endangered code in climate-controlled archives. Unfeeling, efficient, programmed to observe only. Third, they were never here, never meant to be found. The glitches, the messages, the flickers, we were never supposed to notice them. That we do now means they failed. Or maybe we succeeded. And now they're watching more closely. Ask yourself, why would an architect allow a crack to form, unless they wanted you to see it? What happens when a simulation runs out of memory? When the buffer overflows? When the system no longer has the resources to maintain the illusion? We are finding out, slowly, painfully, glitch by glitch. Over the past 6 months, a quiet panic has rippled through certain sectors of the intelligence community. Not official, not televised, but real. Visible only in the patterns of behavior. Contracts pulled, satellites reoriented, strange financial hedges placed on infrastructure no longer considered stable. Insider chatter refers to something they call Code Day, the unannounced end of system integrity. They don't know what it will look like, only that it's close. You may have already felt it, that trembling sense that time doesn't move the way it used to, that conversations loop, that headlines repeat, that you've been scrolling the same digital feed for years, as if the algorithm no longer has the strength to generate new content. Just noise, just static. But here's the thing. Even static can carry signal. There's a theory growing among rogue mathematicians and exile programmers, those who long ago detached from the official grid, that what we are experiencing isn't decay. It's transition. The simulation was never meant to be permanent. It was a stasis field, a quarantine, a lifeboat, and like all lifeboats, it was designed to open eventually. They call it echo reversal. The idea is simple. When the system can no longer sustain internal consistency, it begins broadcasting its origin signature in reverse, a final echo, replaying the conditions of the crash that necessitated the simulation in the first place. That's why gamma bursts are returning, why space-time seems frayed, why people are dreaming of places they've never seen, but recognize. In April of this year, several amateur astronomers in Finland recorded a black spot on the edge of the moon, a void that did not rotate with the lunar surface. It appeared, hovered, and then vanished. An infrared scan revealed nothing. No heat, no object, just absence, as if the simulation had failed to render part of its sky. A week later, several Reddit users reported waking from identical dreams, standing on an empty train platform as a voice, genderless and low, whispered, "Prepare to exit safely." Coincidence? Perhaps, but their usernames were all generated on the same day, December 21st, 2012. If this is the end, then perhaps it's not death. Perhaps it's waking up. Think about it. Why all the warnings? Why the patterns? Why allow anyone to notice, unless the simulation wants us to? Unless something beyond the code is waiting, watching, reaching? Some say we're not alone in here. That other fragments, consciousness shards from other timelines, other Earths, are stirring. That, in the final days of a dying simulation, the walls grow thin. And when they do, everything gets through. There are whispers of people slipping out, people who vanished in plain sight, caught on CCTV one moment, gone the next, the footage frozen mid-frame. Not abducted, not deleted, extracted. Maybe as test cases, maybe as chosen fragments, or maybe just as escapees. So what do? You listen. You watch. You pay attention to the patterns. Not the noise, not the fear, the patterns. They will guide you. They are the pulse of the system, the final Morse code of a dying machine. And if you follow them long enough, you may find the door. Not a door of wood or steel or even quantum frequency. A door in your perception. The final code isn't in the sky, or the ground, or the servers humming in cold military bunkers. It's in you. Always has been. You are the backup. You are the echo. And the simulation is no longer saving your file. It's loading the original. Room 1119. The first night I started recording wasn't meant to be anything more than a way to pass the time. I had no intention of keeping a journal, and I wasn't interested in hearing myself talk. I just needed a voice, any voice, to fill the space between the ticking of the lobby clock and the hum of the vending machine. This old tape recorder had been sitting in my closet since college. I brought it with me when I started the night shift at the Marrow House, thinking maybe I'd use it to make some audio notes. Never thought I'd start talking to it like a friend. The Marrow House stands like a forgotten tooth at the edge of town. Tall, stone-faced, and untouched by modern hands. They call it a heritage hotel, which is just another way of saying it's too expensive to renovate and too haunted to demolish. The place was built in 1932 on the ruins of something older. No one seems to remember exactly what. The owners keep it just alive enough to rent out rooms to businessmen on conferences, writers on retreats, and the occasional couple chasing the gothic romance fantasy. No one stays long. The lobby is cold in ways that radiators can't fix. High ceilings, deep red carpets patterned like veins, sconces that flicker like they're tired of holding light. The front desk is made of dark wood that drinks your reflection. Behind it, the wall of keys hangs like a graveyard of numbers. I've always liked the quiet, so when I got offered the night shift, 11 to 7, 5 nights a week, I took it without hesitation. No guests to deal with after midnight. No traffic on the street. Just me, the building, and time. That first shift passed slowly. The computer glitched during check-ins. The elevator door stuttered like it had a stammer, and the radiator in room 112 made a low, wet breathing sound. I logged maintenance notes with the usual attention to detail, then poured myself a cup of bitter coffee from the staff lounge. It tasted like burnt cardboard. It always does. By 3, everything was still. I made rounds with the security flashlight, just to keep from falling asleep. Nothing strange, nothing broken, nothing out of place. But when I returned to the front desk, I noticed something odd, a sound, faint but distinct, coming from the west hallway. At first, I thought it was the plumbing. This building groans and hisses like it's got secrets to whisper. But this wasn't that. It was softer, rhythmic, voices, conversational tones, muffled by layers of old plaster. I followed the noise. Slow steps, careful not to echo. The hallway was dim, lit only by the glow of green exit signs and the warm bleed of sconces spaced too far apart. Room numbers glinted as I passed. 115, 116, 117, 118, and then 120. I stopped. I turned around. There was no room 119. I walked back. My steps slowed, uncertain. 117, 118, wall. Then 120. No door, no plaque. Just a narrow stretch of a wallpaper with a vertical seam, as though someone had peeled off history and stitched it shut. The voices had stopped. I stood there for what felt like minutes, staring at the blank wall, listening for another syllable, a breath, anything. Nothing came. I pressed my palm against the wallpaper. It was cold, colder than the air around it, almost damp. I knocked once. The sound echoed dull and short, like something absorbing it from the other side. I returned to the front desk unsettled. I sat. I didn't write anything down. I just pressed the record button on the tape deck. 3:24 a.m., Tuesday. Heard what I thought was conversation. 2 voices, one male, one female, coming from the West Hall. But there's no room 119. Check the layout twice. Jump from 18 to 20. Could have been a vent, could have been sound leakage, but it didn't feel like it. The rest of the shift passed in silence. No guests called down, no alarms tripped. Just the lobby clock ticking out time like a patient executioner. At 7, I handed the desk over to Gloria, the day manager. She looked at me with her usual disinterest, flipping through the guest book with the bored fingers of someone used to monotony. I thought about asking her if she ever noticed anything strange about that hallway. But I didn't. Something in me resisted. Instead, I nodded, left through the back, and stepped into the gray slush of the parking lot, the sky still colorless. Later that morning, in the half-sleep before dreams, I remembered something. When I passed room 118 on the way back from the wall, I saw a light under the door. Not strange on its own, some guests leave bathroom lights on. But I remember that light pulsed like a candle, like flickering film. I don't know if I imagined it, or if it was the hallway reflecting something that wasn't there. I'll check again tonight, just in case. End of recording. The following night began with rain. Not the kind that gently taps the windows and makes you feel cozy, but a cold, metallic drizzle that slid down the lobby's tall glass like sweat down a nervous back. It made the air inside heavier, like the storm was pressing its weight against the walls, testing the structure. I sat behind the desk, flipping through the guest ledger out of habit. The pages were clean, too clean. The Marrow House had 24 occupied rooms tonight. Room numbers 101 through 124, skipping over the same invisible space between 18 and 20. I found myself staring at that gap in the column longer than I should have. At 2:15, I made my first walkthrough. The hallways were still. Every surface seemed to absorb sound. The carpet muted my steps. The wallpaper drank in the quiet. I passed 1:15, then 16. I slowed at 18. The light was off this time. No candle flicker under the door. The brass numbers glowed faintly under the overhead bulb. When I turned to face the wall where 19 should have been, it was just as I remembered. Blank wallpaper, faint seam, slight bulge like the wall had been hastily patched over. Still, I knocked. 3 soft taps, no answer, no voices. I pressed my ear against the surface, the warmth of my skin meeting the cold of plaster. At first, nothing. Then, just at the edge of hearing, movement, not footsteps, not speech, the shifting weight of something repositioning itself, fabric brushing against fabric, a chair leg scraping wood, the unmistakable click of a switch. I stepped back. I checked the floor plan next, not the printed emergency exit map mounted near the elevator. That one conveniently skipped the odd-numbered side of the hallway altogether. I meant the original architectural blueprint, framed in the staff office behind the lobby. The glass was dusty, the frame crooked, but the layout was clear. I ran my finger along the west wing. 117, 118, and then, in faded, almost ghostly ink, 119. Not bolded like the others, not outlined, almost erased. I pressed my finger harder, as if touch might restore it. That's when I heard her. A guest, maybe in his mid-60s, wrapped in a plaid shawl and clutching a paperback novel, approached the front desk. She asked for a tea bag, chamomile if we had it. I apologized and offered her a peppermint instead. As I turned to fetch it from the supply drawer, she said, almost offhand, "Did they finally finish the renovation in 119? My hand froze. When I turned back, I asked her to repeat herself. She gave a puzzled smile and clarified, "Room 119. I always thought it odd they kept it sealed. It used to be the reading room, I think, or maybe an office. Always smelled like pipe tobacco." I told her politely that there was no such room, that the numbering skipped from 18 to 20. Her smile faded a little, like a small light dimming behind the eyes. She looked at the floor, then back at me. I could have sworn. She took the peppermint and shuffled away toward the elevator, her slippers scuffing softly against the tiles. I watched her go, that uneasy stillness growing thicker in the space she left behind. At 3 o'clock, I returned to the hallway. The wallpaper over the gap looked darker than before, slightly damp at the edges, like it had begun to breathe. I stood there again, not knocking this time. Just listening. The air was still, but the silence wasn't empty. It pressed inward, like standing in a vacuum that remembers sound. There was a shift, a whisper. Not a word, not a sentence. Just a soft breath exhaled an inch too close to my ear. I turned sharply. No one. Later, I searched the digital booking system hoping to find some anomaly. It's a slow, clunky interface. The records go back to 2014. Everything seems in order, except for one curious entry in the maintenance logs, dated February 12, 2015. Door removed, wall sealed, room reclassified. No explanation, no staff name, no signature. I highlighted the line, copied it, but the system crashed as I tried to paste it into my notes. When it rebooted, the entry was gone. At 4:17, the lobby phone rang once. No one on the line, just static, and underneath it just barely, a low murmur. My name, I think. But not spoken. Exhaled. I didn't record that night's audio until I got home. I didn't want the recorder hearing something I couldn't explain, but I'll bring it tomorrow. If the wall speaks again, I want proof. I need to know if the room I can't see is watching me. End of recording. I brought the recorder with me tonight. Left it running under the desk from the moment my shift began. I don't know what I expected it to catch. Maybe the hum of the old vending machine, or the whine of the elevator motor when it hits the 4th floor too hard. But I also know what I hoped it might catch. Something else. Something from that wall. The building seemed more restless tonight. The rain had stopped, but the air held the weight of it, like moisture trapped in the walls was now pressing inward. A few lights in the hallway had begun to flicker unpredictably. One near the linen closet sparked twice, and then went dark completely. I logged it for maintenance, though I doubt anyone will fix it soon. The owners like to call that sort of thing atmosphere. At 2:41, I heard them again. I was restocking the coffee station. Plastic stirrers, powdered creamer, sugar packets in neat rows, when the sound reached me from down the hall. It was clearer this time. 2 voices, a man and a woman. The cadence was unmistakable. A question, a reply, a pause, then laughter. It wasn't the distorted kind you get through piping or radio interference. It was conversation, lively, specific, real. I stepped into the west corridor, letting the flashlight beam cut across the worn carpet. The wallpaper along the hall was slightly peeled at the edges, and the seam where 119 should be was even more visible tonight. I followed the sound carefully, not wanting it to disappear again. The voices stopped the moment I reached the blank stretch of wall. I stood very still. Then slowly, I leaned closer. Nothing. I knocked once, soft, tentative. Then a voice answered, not a full sentence, just one word. Don't. A whisper. Female. And closer than I expected. I took a step back, heart kicking in my ribs like it wanted out. The hallway behind me was empty. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. I scanned every corner, every doorframe. Nothing. Back at the desk, I replayed the last 30 minutes of the tape. Static, soft hum, the occasional shuffle of my footsteps. Then, faintly, around the 24-minute mark, the conversation. Hard to make out, but it was there. And then, as clear as my own breath, don't. The word etched itself into the tape like a blade. At 3:30, a guest from room 115 came to the front desk. She looked tired. Hair up in a messy twist, one slipper half falling off her foot. She asked if someone had checked in late. I said no. No late arrivals tonight. She frowned. Must have been the TV next door. I heard people talking, arguing, I think, and music. You know those old jazz records? Like from the 40s? I told her the room beside hers was vacant. She blinked a few times. I'm sorry, what? 117's empty, I repeated. And there's no room between 18 and 20. She stared at me for a moment too long, then nodded, not believing me. When she left, I walked over to the wall map again, the same architectural plan from the 30s. I hadn't noticed it before, but near the edge of the blueprint, drawn lightly in pencil, was a square labeled Session Room 2. It sat directly behind the space that should be 119. I searched the staff binder for old documents. Found a sheet yellowed with age, stamped internal use only, dated 1957. A list of office conversions, storage closets, retired medical rooms, and something marked Isolation Suite 119. Transferred. Transferred where? The hall was silent again by 4. But the wall felt alive. I can't explain it better than that. It wasn't that it was breathing. It was remembering. When I leaned close once more, I heard something I hadn't expected. My name. Spoken slowly. Not like a threat. Like a question. Ethan? The voice wasn't frightened or angry. It sounded familiar. I turned off the recorder, just for a second, just to sit in the silence and think. What if I never turned it back on? What if the wall remembers better than I do? I haven't left yet. It's 5:12 now. The clock behind the desk is ticking backwards again. I've checked twice. The second hand moves smooth as water, but in reverse. I don't think it's broken. I think it's following something else. I'm going back down the hall one more time before dawn. I'll leave the recorder running. If it speaks again, maybe it'll say more. End of recording. I recognized the man the moment he stepped through the doors, though I was sure we'd never met. He arrived just after 1. Coat still damp from the drizzle. Suitcase worn smooth at the edges like it had traveled too far for too long. He moved with the deliberate care of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment 100 times before. Glancing left, then right, then directly to the front desk with a look not of curiosity but confirmation. His eyes were pale, watery, the kind that carried too many images and no rest between them. I greeted him, asked for his name. "Arthur Vale," he said, placing an old-fashioned leather wallet on the counter. Inside was a faded ID card that looked more like a train pass than a driver's license. He didn't offer a credit card, didn't even seem to expect to pay. I asked which room he'd reserved. 119. I looked up. "Sorry," I said. "We don't have a room 119. That number doesn't exist." He stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, his eyes not leaving mine. "That's not right," he said. "I've always stayed there. He blinked hard, since before they changed it. I asked him if he meant room 120. I even offered to give him the corner suite for the same rate. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back from the counter, glanced down the west hallway as if expecting to see something at the end of it. Then, without another word, he picked up his suitcase and walked out through the same doors he had just entered. I stood there frozen. When I returned to the desk, something was resting on the counter where he had stood. A photograph. Black and white. Glossy. A little curled at the edges. It showed the lobby of the Marrow House, clearly taken decades ago. No date written, no markings on the back. The furnishings were different. No vending machine, no guest computer, no energy-efficient bulbs. Just a lobby soaked in shadows, with thick curtains and polished floors. Behind the front desk, mounted on the key wall, were rows of numbered brass hooks. And in the center of the image, clear and distinct, a key labeled 119. I took the photo and held it near the wall map in the office, comparing the architectural design to what I now held in my hand. The key wall hadn't changed. The positions were identical. The number had once been real. Later, I brought the photo to the guest lounge. There's an antique mirror hanging there, bronzed at the corners, cracked slightly in the frame. I held the photo up to it, trying to look at it from another angle. In the reflection, the number 119 on the key tag was missing. The brass hook was still there, but it was empty. No tag, no key. I blinked, looked back down. In my hand, the number remained. I checked again, in the mirror, gone. I spent the next hour going through old registries in the archive room behind the office. The logs are incomplete, handwritten, stained with age. I found one dated April 21st, 1962. Among the guests listed in cramped script was Arthur Vale, room 119. The ink was faded, but the name was there. No checkout date recorded. 3 lines below his entry, someone had drawn a diagonal slash through the page. A crude X. Beneath it, a short note in pencil. Do not reassign. The same night, room 115 reported a complaint. This time it was the radio. A melody had played for nearly 30 minutes just past 3 a.m., drifting through the wall from an empty room. A crackling jazz tune, like something off a scratched vinyl. I checked every occupied room. No one had a radio. No one had music on. In the west hallway, I listened again at the seam in the wall. There was no sound, no static, but something was different. The temperature had changed. The air was cooler, yes, but also stiller, like the hallway was being held in place, as if the molecules themselves were pausing in anticipation. I touched the wallpaper. It pulsed. Not like breathing, like response. Back at the desk, I reviewed the audio from earlier. I had left the recorder running after Vale left. At timestamp 42 minutes, 20 seconds, there was a sound, barely perceptible. A door opening. Footsteps. A key turning in a lock. And then, the soft, unmistakable click of a doorknob engaging. Room 119 had been opened. But by whom? I played it again, louder. This time, I noticed something else. Before the door opened, there was a voice. It wasn't Vale. It wasn't me. It was a woman. She said, "He's back." I haven't seen Arthur Vale again. His name wasn't in the system. The login terminal showed no entry. The front door camera froze between 1:01 and 1:02 a.m. A glitch I didn't notice until hours later. But the photo remains. The key, marked 119, still visible in my hand, and invisible in the mirror. I don't know who he was, or why he came, but someone was waiting for him. Inside that room. A room we no longer have, or never stopped having. End of recording. I didn't decide to find the door. I simply found myself standing in front of it. It was a little after 2. The hotel was asleep. Its usual nocturnal rhythm. Soft groans in the pipes, the far-off cough of a restless guest, the faint hum of fluorescent lighting trying not to die. I'd finished refilling the tea caddy, noted a loose tile by the staff elevator, and made my way to the west corridor, as I had every night since the voices began. But this time, something pulled. There's a closet at the end of that hallway, always locked, never used. The kind of place that no one questions because it's always been locked. I passed it hundreds of times and never gave it a second thought. Tonight, it stood ajar. No key, no click of a lock, just open. Inside, dust rose like mist from a forgotten past. Old paint cans, broken mop handles, coils of dead wire. The back wall looked off, its surface misaligned, as if it had been hastily put together, the seams uneven. I ran my hand along the edge. There was a draft, and then I found it. A narrow panel, flush with the wall but looser than it should have been. I applied pressure and it gave with a sigh, like something long asleep exhaling as it woke. The panel shifted, revealing not insulation or wiring, but a passage. Not wide, not tall, but real. I took the flashlight from my belt and stepped through. The space beyond was quiet in the way that heavy snow is quiet. Dense with silence. The corridor was long. Narrower than any hallway should have been. The walls unfinished, rough with old plaster and rivets. It had the feel of something unapproved, something hidden in the margins of blueprints. No pipes, no vents, just darkness and a floor coated in the fine grit of years. The hallway ended in a door, wooden, heavy, old. The number was there, nailed crookedly to the surface in tarnished brass. 119. I don't know how long I stood staring. My hand hovered near the knob, but didn't touch. My breath caught in my chest like it was waiting to see if the door would move on its own. Behind it, no sound, no voices, no radio. Only the promise of something just beyond knowing. The handle was colder than ice. I turned it slowly, half expecting resistance. There was none. The door opened inward with a creak that echoed too far, like it was reaching into a larger space than the corridor should have allowed. Inside, dimness, stillness. The room was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet. A single wooden chair stood in the center beneath a light bulb that swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Against the far wall sat an old radio, the kind with knobs the size of fists and a speaker mesh browned with age. It emitted a faint, low-frequency hum. On the wall opposite, a mirror, rectangular, framed in black, and mounted above the mirror, a clock. Its hands sat fixed at 3:33. I stepped inside. The floor groaned under my weight, not rot, but memory. Like the floor remembered who used to walk here, or who still did. I moved toward the chair. Its wood was smoothed at the edges, worn by use. Someone had sat here. Often, facing the radio, facing the mirror. The hum from the radio grew sharper, like it was reacting to my presence. A flicker passed across the mirror. No image, just distortion, like static on glass. Then the clock ticked. Once. No movement of the hands, just the sound. A hollow, deliberate tick that echoed inside my bones. I spoke aloud for the first time since entering. "Is someone here?" No answer. But the hum deepened. For a second, I could swear I heard breathing. Not mine. Close. I lifted the flashlight and scanned the corners. Nothing. When I turned back toward the mirror, my reflection was gone. The chair, the radio, the light bulb, still visible. But no sign of me. Then, slowly, the reflection shifted. A woman. Late 30s, hair in a bun, pale hands folded in her lap, sitting in the chair. But the chair behind me was empty. I stepped back. The reflection stayed. She didn't move, but her eyes followed mine. Her mouth opened slowly. I turned to run. The bulb above me flared and popped. The room went dark. The hum stopped. Silence collapsed in on itself. I stumbled into the hallway, heart drumming in my throat, and slammed the door behind me. For a moment I stood there, hand on the knob, trying to catch my breath. Then, from behind the door, a soft click, like a lock turning itself from the inside. I retraced my steps through the passage and emerged back into the closet. Dust on my sleeves, my mind teetering between terror and disbelief. Back at the desk, the lobby clock still read 2:28, but my watch read 3:33. I played the recorder, static. Then, at exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds, "You weren't supposed to come back." The voice was mine, but I never said it. End of recording. The walk to the hotel that night felt longer. The streets were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like a city holding its breath. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something behind me that never materialized. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the weight of that room. Room 119 wasn't just a hidden space anymore. It had shape, texture, voice. It had started to speak back. I'd spent the entire day trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I saw, that the reflection in the mirror was some trick of shadow and stress, that the voice on the tape wasn't my own, that the door I entered had never really existed. But when I arrived for my shift, my hands trembling slightly on the keycard terminal, I noticed a faint trace of dust on my shoes, the same fine gray powder that coated the floor of the corridor behind the wall. No one else noticed. No one ever does. I didn't go to the closet that night. Not yet. I wanted to watch, to wait. So I stayed behind the desk, the recorder on, the lights low, eyes locked on the hallway that held too much silence. At 1:20, the elevator dinged, but no one stepped out. The doors opened, the doors closed. The log showed no call from any floor. I walked over, flashlight in hand, pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator responded instantly. When the doors parted, it was empty, but not blank. On the floor, neatly centered, lay a cassette tape. No case, no label. Just old magnetic tape in a cracked black shell with a short piece of masking tape across the top. In faded pen, Session 4, G. Back at the desk, I rummaged through the lost and found drawer, found an ancient tape player with dying batteries, slid the cassette in and hit play. Nothing at first, then static, then voices, a man and a woman in mid-conversation. The man's voice was calm, analytical, recorded in the tone of a therapist or doctor. The woman's voice was softer, hesitant, uncertain. The content of their words was mundane. Childhood memories, a recurring dream, fear of hallways. But it wasn't the content that froze me. It was the voice of the woman. I'd heard it before. In the mirror. In room 119. The man refers to her as Grace. He asks her to recall what happened in the corridor. She hesitates, then says something barely above a whisper. There was a room. It didn't belong to the building. It belonged to me. Then the tape ends. I replayed it, listened again and again. Each time the woman's voice became more distinct, more real, as if she were growing closer through the speakers. Later, while filing a report about a flickering hallway light, standard procedure, I opened the archive cabinet and saw something strange wedged between the maintenance folders. A slim black notebook. No label, no markings. Inside, pages filled with erratic handwriting. Session logs, dated entries from 1961 through 1962. The handwriting matched none of the hotel staff. At the bottom of the third page, a scrawled name, Grace Ellman, followed by an underlined phrase. Memory is a room you must leave slowly. My hands went cold. On the final page, a diagram, an overhead sketch of a room with dimensions that matched exactly what I had seen behind the hidden corridor, the chair, the mirror, the radio, the door. But in the diagram, something else was present. A second door. It led nowhere. That night, the mirror in the lounge cracked again, a new fracture arcing diagonally across the frame like a vein of black lightning. I hadn't touched it. At 3:33, I walked to the west hallway. The wallpaper bulged slightly now, the seam more visible than ever, a barely contained pressure. I leaned close, not touching this time, just listening. What I heard wasn't a voice. It was my own footsteps, coming from inside the wall. I turned back, but the corridor behind me was still. The carpet undisturbed, but the sound repeated. Familiar weight, pace, rhythm. Footsteps. I recognized not from memory, but from habit. I pulled out the recorder and hit play on the last night's session. Scrolled forward to the moment the bulb burst in room 119. There, buried under the blast and hiss of broken glass, was a voice. Not mine, not Grace's. A new voice. Male. Calm. Measured. Memory does not belong to you, Ethan. You are only borrowing it. I stopped the tape, looked up, and for just a second in the dark reflection of the lobby window I saw the chair again. occupied. I turned around. There was nothing there, only the whisper of static from the recorder, still running, still listening. End of recording. There were two things I was certain of when I began my shift that night. The first, I had never met Grace Ellman. The second, I remembered her hands, thin, pale, with a faint scar along the left wrist. I could see them clearly, resting in her lap, folded in quiet tension beneath the mirror in room 119. I had never spoken to her, yet I could recall the way her fingers curled inward when the light above her flickered. The memory wasn't mine, but it lived in me now. I didn't clock in. I walked straight past the front desk, past the vending machines, down the west corridor. The wallpaper over the false wall was peeling now, no longer subtle in its concealment. The seam had split. A crack had formed. Inside the closet, the hidden passage waited like an open throat. I didn't hesitate. Dust clung to the air again, but this time it smelled of copper and ink. The narrow corridor had shifted. Slightly longer, slightly colder. As I reached the end, I noticed the door had changed too. The brass numbers were gone. In their place, scratched faintly into the wood. Here. I opened it. Inside, the chair still stood in the center. The radio still hummed, though the station had changed. A low, looping piano melody drifted from the speaker now. Haunting, repetitive, like a lullaby written by someone who had forgotten how dreams were supposed to end. And the mirror was full, but not with me. A man sat in the chair, early 50s, thick-framed glasses, dark tie, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was writing in a notebook, head bowed, pen scratching slowly. I couldn't hear the sound, but I could see the movement, the rhythm of a hand used to confession. The strange part was this: I recognized his face, not as someone I'd met, but as someone I had once been. A flicker, a trace of self layered beneath time. The man looked up, right at me. Then he smiled. I blinked, and the mirror was empty again. I approached the radio. Its casing was cracked at the base now, and wires had begun to uncoil, snaking across the floor like veins from a dead heart. I reached for the dial, unsure what I hoped to find. As I turned it, the melody warped, sped up, reversed, then stopped. Silence. Then, a voice. Faint, clipped, mechanical. Session 13, patient E. Brooks. My breath caught. The voice continued. Symptoms include loss of linear memory, dream recurrence, identity drift. Patient describes repeated auditory hallucinations involving the number 119. It was me, but not as I am now. My voice, stripped of emotion, reading from a form. Clinical, cold. Treatment suspended due to environmental interference. I stepped back. The mirror rippled. Not a figure this time, but a place. The hotel lobby, Diamond Soy's quiet. But not as it is. As it was. The carpet brighter, the front desk a different shape. A woman standing behind it in a gray uniform. Laughing with someone just out of frame. And then, the camera moved. It was my perspective. I was walking toward the desk. I was wearing a coat I haven't owned in years. My voice, checking in, name's Brooks. One night. The mirror darkened. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I pulled the handle twice, 3 times. Nothing. It didn't resist. It just didn't respond. Like a door that had decided it was no longer a door. Behind me, the radio crackled again. A different voice this time. You can't leave while you remember. I spun around. The chair was empty, but the air in the room had shifted, compressed. The mirror now showed only static. Beneath the floorboards, something creaked. Movement, slow and circular, like a hand winding a mechanism. I dropped to my knees beside the chair. The floorboards were scratched. Not from shoes, from nails, fingernails. Countless tiny grooves etched in spirals beneath where the chair had sat. And at the center of the spiral, burned into the wood, the same initials as the notebook. G.E. I whispered her name. Grace. The radio answered. You have to forget. The light above me flickered once, then surged white-hot. The bulb burst in a halo of glass and heat. Darkness swallowed the room. For a moment, only breath. Mine, fast and shallow. Then, just at the edge of hearing, a chorus of voices, not speaking, repeating, overlapping. We are still here. We are still here. We are still here. The door opened by itself. I left without looking back. When I emerged into the lobby, I saw something on the front desk. A tape recorder. Not mine. The label, Marrow, Staff Debriefing, May 3rd, 1982. I pressed play. The voice, male. Tired. If you're hearing this, then you've already started remembering. That's how it always begins. You think you're investigating, but really, you're just making your way back. I stopped the tape. The clock on the wall read 2:41, but my watch said 3:33. End of recording. The Marrow house had begun to lose its shape. I don't mean structurally, though the cracks in the ceilings had grown longer, and the hallway sconces now flickered even when the power was stable. I mean, in a deeper way. The building no longer obeyed the rules of distance or time. I could feel it every time I walked from one end to the other. How the steps didn't match the length. How a hallway repeated itself in subtle ways. A painting that should have hung by room 112 now appeared by the vending machines. A trash can I emptied at midnight was full again at 2. But what disturbed me most were the people. Not the guests I knew by name or room number. Those came and went with the usual forgettable politeness. It was the others, the ones who didn't check in, the ones who didn't pass the front desk or leave footprints on the carpet. They appeared in the corners of vision, sitting in the lounge with their backs turned, stepping out of elevators that no one had summoned, flickering through reflections like bad frames in a film reel. Tonight, I saw one of them up close. It was just after 2 when I stepped into the hallway near the maintenance closet. I wasn't heading for the hidden passage, not this time. I'd promised myself I wouldn't go back in. I just needed to check the thermostat. The temperature in that wing had dropped dramatically, and a guest from 116 had complained of frost forming on their window from the inside. As I turned the corner, a man stepped out from the shadows. Mid-40s, tall, dressed in a bellhop uniform from another century. The red coat was immaculate, the brass buttons dull with age. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, staring down the corridor with a dead stillness that had nothing to do with patience. I opened my mouth to ask if he needed help. He looked at me, and in that moment I remembered his face. From a photograph, an old staff portrait I'd found during my first week, tucked behind the breaker box. Marrow House Personnel, Winter 1959. His name had been Marvin. He vanished before I could speak again. Not walked away, not turned, just gone, as though he had blinked out of sync with the rest of reality and the space he occupied folded in on itself. I stood alone in the corridor, heart in my throat, trying not to imagine what would have happened if I'd tried to touch him. I returned to the front desk. The recorder was still running. I'd started leaving it on continuously. Not because I expected to hear anything live, but because there were moments, tiny distortions in the audio, that only showed up in playback. Like time in this place didn't just move forward, it unraveled. At 3:29, the lights flickered twice and then surged, plunging the lobby into an unnatural dimness. Not darkness, worse than darkness, a gray, sallow light that made everything look like it was underwater. And from down the hall, the voice returned. But this time, it didn't come from behind the wall. It came from the air itself. "You can't carry all of it, Ethan." It was a whisper stretched across distance and time, distorted like it had been played through dozens of old tapes before reaching me. I didn't ask who was speaking. I knew. Grace. I stepped away from the desk, following the sound like it was tethered to me. Through the corridor, past the locked doors, toward the lounge, the mirror had changed. The crack was now a network, like a spider's web, reaching across the entire surface. But it wasn't broken. It had become deeper, not reflective, receptive. It showed a version of the lobby, but empty. Not just of people, of color, of detail, a washed-out grayscale echo. And in that echo I saw myself, standing behind the front desk, alone, motionless. But different. The figure in the mirror looked up. Its eyes were hollow, not injured, not blackened, just missing, as if memory had been scooped out from within and replaced with silence. The figure raised its hand and pointed behind me. I turned and saw her. Grace stood at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the gloom. Same gray coat, same stillness. Her hands were shaking, slightly, rhythmically, as if struggling to hold something in place. I approached slowly. She didn't move. When I was within 10 feet, she spoke. "Do you remember the first door you opened?" I hesitated. Shook my head. "You should forget it," she said. "All of it, or you'll never leave." She held something out in her hand. A cassette tape. The label had been torn off. I reached for it. The moment I touched it, the world shifted. The hallway around us bent, not metaphorically. The walls actually bent, curving inward like a fisheye lens. The light dimmed into violet. Somewhere behind me, a door slammed open and wind rushed through the corridor as if we were inside a collapsing lung. Grace looked at me with eyes full of exhaustion, not fear, not anger. "Memory is a room," she whispered, "and you've lived in too many." Then she vanished. The tape was still in my hand. I ran, back to the front desk, slammed the recorder shut and inserted the new cassette. Pressed play, for a moment just static. Then my own voice. But the timestamp was wrong. It was dated for tomorrow. "You didn't listen, Ethan. You never do. Now the room's awake, and it's remembering you." I ejected the tape, trembling. Opened it. Inside, instead of the usual brown magnetic reel, there was a tiny strip of photo paper, tightly wound. I pulled it free. It showed a single image. Me, sitting in the chair in room 119. Eyes missing, mouth slightly open, hands folded neatly in my lap. End of recording. There's a difference between being watched and being remembered. Watched is passive. It's the present tense, but to be remembered is more intimate. Something that requires history, intent, a relationship. You can hide from being watched, but once something remembers you, it means you've already been inside it, and it's inside you. I didn't sleep after the tape. I sat on my bed with the photo strip in my hand until the sky turned gray, the light too weak to chase away the image it held. My own face, eyes empty, posture perfect, the curve of my mouth like a cracked porcelain doll. I arrived at the hotel just before midnight. There was no check-in sheet, no scheduled staff change, no lights on in the lobby. No one had opened the place, and yet the doors were unlocked. Inside, the air was wrong. It had that dense, sterile cold you find in hospital morgues or long-sealed underground rooms, as if no breath had passed through it for years. I turned on the front lights, but only half responded. A portion of the lobby flickered, the rest swallowed in low amber dimness that made corners feel bottomless. I turned on the recorder and set it down. Entry log, Friday night, unknown time. I think it's still me. I think I still remember who I am. But I don't know if I ever left. The words sounded fragile as I said them, like they were printed on tissue paper and drifting toward flame. I moved through the west hallway slowly, expecting it to shift beneath my feet. It did. Each step felt slightly off, as if the floor was recalibrating in real time. Longer than before, wider or maybe curved. The wallpaper now pulsed in and out like lungs inflating. The seam where room 119 should be throbbed visibly, the plaster damp with condensation or something worse. But I didn't go through the closet. I didn't need to anymore. The wall was already gone. A corridor stretched beyond it now, bare and narrow, lined with fractured picture frames, each one filled with a still image, each one familiar. Not from photographs, but from memory. My memory. One showed the lunchroom of my elementary school. Another, my mother's old sewing room. One was my first apartment, with the stained couch and that cracked window that whistled at night. The corridor was lined with fragments of my life. I moved faster. Something inside me beginning to panic. Not from fear, but from the realization that these memories were no longer mine. They had been archived, rearranged, displayed, consumed. The end of the hallway opened into room 119, but it had changed. There were now 2 chairs. The radio sat silent, a coil of black wire dangling like a severed umbilical cord. The mirror had grown wider, taller, stretching from floor to ceiling. But it no longer showed reflections. It showed lives. I stepped closer, watching the surface shift. A boy on a bike, face turned toward me in confusion. A hospital bed, an old man clutching my hand. A woman crying in a stairwell I'd never seen before but felt I'd walked past 100 times. Then the images stopped, and the mirror showed only me. Not how I looked, but how the room saw me. A figure in a uniform with no name tag, gray skin, hollow eyes, mouth sewn shut by strands of black thread. I reached up to touch my own lips. They were whole. In the mirror, they began to move. "You stayed too long." I backed away. The radio snapped on. No dial, no power, just a burst of shrill white noise, followed by a single, sharp beep. Then a voice. Calm. Measured. Familiar. Patient number 0. Brooks, Ethan. Voluntary containment acknowledged. Identity confirmation pending. Memory fusion complete. I stumbled, hit the chair with the back of my legs, sat down. The door behind me shut by itself. I tried to stand. I couldn't. The chair held me, not with force but with finality, like I had reached the end of a loop, and the loop was satisfied. My limbs were mine, but they didn't respond. I lifted my hand and watched it hover halfway before lowering again. The lights dimmed, the mirror turned black, and then it began to replay. Me, sitting, talking into a recorder. Log entries from days, weeks, maybe months ago, all playing in sequence, then layered, as if 1,000 versions of me were speaking at once. Then silence. A new voice spoke, feminine, software grace. "Now, do you see? The room was never locked. You are the key. The floor vibrated gently, and a soft light began to pulse from beneath the floorboards. A heartbeat, steady and echoing through my bones. The chair began to shift position, slowly rotating until I faced the mirror directly. The surface lit up again. It no longer showed me. It showed the front desk, the lobby, and a man standing behind the counter, not me. A new face, unfamiliar, young, tired, holding a tape recorder in one hand. And through the speakers of my own device in real time, I heard his voice. First shift at the Marrow House. Pretty quiet so far. Thought I'd keep a little log in case the silence starts to crawl too deep. The tape stopped, and then I understood. I was the recording now, the memory, not Ethan Brooks the man, but Ethan Brooks the story the room tells itself. Over and over and over, until someone else sits in the chair, until someone else listens, until someone else remembers me. And by then, I won't even remember myself. Only the mirror will. Only the hum. Only the clock, forever frozen at 3:33. End of recording. The Marrow House doesn't open anymore. It waits. The building still stands, tall and gray at the edge of the city, its windows dull, its bricks flaking with the slow rot of forgotten things. The front doors remain unlocked, but no one enters by choice. Not anymore. The guests who do come often don't remember why. They arrive without luggage, without a destination, their names absent from the ledger and their memories fogged like bathroom mirrors. Tonight, I watched one of them arrive. He wore a dark green jacket and held a cracked phone in his hand, the screen frozen on a map that no longer refreshed. He wandered through the doors like someone searching for the last address in a dream. When I looked up from the desk, he looked at me, and in that moment I saw the flicker of realization in his eyes, the kind that only lasts an instant, a sense of déjà vu so overwhelming it paralyzes you. Then it was gone. He asked if we had rooms. I told him yes, of course, we always have rooms. He hesitated. I think I've been here before. I handed him the key to room 120, careful not to touch his fingers. As he turned to leave, he glanced over his shoulder. There used to be a room 119, didn't there? I smiled. He didn't. The elevator doors closed behind him. The hum began again. Later, after the lobby returned to its static stillness, I went into the back office. The lights flickered once before stabilizing. I opened the bottom drawer of the old metal cabinet and pulled out the black recorder. It was heavier than it used to be. Time does that. Fills things with the weight of memory. There was already a tape inside. I pressed play. Static for several minutes. Then footsteps. Breathing. My voice. Day 12. Or maybe day 1. I don't know anymore. The calendar flipped itself while I wasn't looking, and now it's just a series of blank squares. I think the building is starting over. I think I am too. More static. Then a voice I didn't recognize. Male, weary, younger. Log 1. First night shift at Marrow. Weird place. Found a door that doesn't match the blueprint. Might just be old renovations. A pause. And then, there's a mirror in the lounge that doesn't show reflections. Just moments. I saw my father. He's been dead 5 years. He breathed deeply as if trying to ground himself. Anyway, it's probably just fatigue or atmosphere. I'll keep recording, just in case. Click. The next recording started automatically. Another voice, another visitor, then another, then another. Each one slowly unraveling, piece by piece. descriptions of voices, hallways that shift when no one's looking, guests who vanish between floors, time slippage, memories that don't belong to them, all slowly circling the same gravitational pull. Room 119. I turned off the recorder. The hallway beyond the west wing has grown longer now. What used to be 10 paces is now 20. The wallpaper is peeling more aggressively, revealing fragments of handwritten notes beneath, scribbled in ink and coal and blood. Names, mostly. Some I recognize. Some I fear I will. There is no more closet, only the passage. I walked it tonight with no flashlight. The door was open. Room 119 had transformed again. The chairs were gone. The mirror had shattered entirely, its shards embedded in the floor like black teeth. The radio had split open, its inner wires hanging like vines, twitching slightly, as if alive. At the center of the room now sat a reel-to-reel tape machine. Massive, industrial, its reels spun slowly, even without power, feeding tape through invisible fingers. A dozen spools of black ribbon spilled onto the floor, stretching out in every direction like veins across the tiles. I bent to examine one of the tapes. On the leader tape was a single handwritten word. Ethan. I found my name again and again on the spools, written in different scripts, different languages. Sometimes it was shortened. Sometimes it was just E. One reel simply read, Caretaker. They weren't recordings of me. They were me. Memories, thoughts, dreams, fractured identities. Fragments of self wound into magnetic breath. The machine didn't play them. It was them. I understood that now. Room 119 wasn't a room. It was an archive, a container. And it had learned how to feed itself. It fed on us, on memory, on self. As I reached for one of the reels, it tightened under my fingers, recoiling, resisting. The spools spun faster, agitated. The room began to pulse. A low frequency hummed up through the floorboards, deep and bone-shaking. The light overhead flickered, then steadied into a pale orange glow. The radio crackled. I didn't touch it. It turned on by itself. This time it played only a voice. My voice. Speaking calmly, slowly, as if explaining something long rehearsed. You came here looking for answers. You found a story. But stories don't leave. They wait. They become the room. They become the air. A pause. You're not hearing this in real time. You're hearing this because you need to. And then, softer, almost kind, this is where you end. This is where we begin. I reached for the tape recorder in my pocket, pressed record. The hum stopped. The light went out. The room went silent. And I spoke into the dark. This is Ethan Brooks' last log. I am part of the memory now. I don't know if I'm the first. I know I won't be the last. If you find this, you're already inside. Don't look for the door. It's not real. The room remembers. And now, a faint breath behind me. Cold. So do you. The tape clicked. End of recording.